Right now, as you listen to this, someone, somewhere, is getting their day ruined by a single comment. Someone is lying awake at 3 in the morning, replaying an awkward conversation from 6 months ago. Someone is checking their phone every 5 minutes, desperately seeking validation from people whose opinions shouldn't matter. Someone is letting fear, criticism, and external pressure control their entire emotional state. But that someone doesn't have to be you. What if I told you that the most successful, powerful, and fulfilled people in the world all share one common trait? It's not intelligence, talent, or luck. It's the ability to remain completely unbothered by external circumstances. They've trained their minds to operate from a place of inner strength so solid that nothing can shake them. This isn't about becoming emotionally numb or disconnected. This is about developing such strong mental control that you choose your emotional responses rather than being at the mercy of every situation, person, or setback that comes your way. By the time you finish this, you'll understand exactly how to build that level of mental mastery. You'll learn the neuroscience behind emotional reactions and how to rewire your brain for unshakable calm. You'll discover why most people are mentally fragile and how to build the kind of inner strength that makes you immune to external pressure. You'll master the art of strategic detachment, learning when to care and when to completely let go. Most importantly, you'll develop practical daily systems that automatically train your mind to stay centered no matter what chaos surrounds you. This isn't theory. This is a complete blueprint for mental freedom. Chapter 1. Why most people are mentally fragile. Here's a brutal truth that no one wants to admit. Most people are walking around with the emotional resilience of wet paper. A single criticism sends them spiraling. One rejection makes them question everything. A bad day becomes a bad week, which becomes a bad month. They've never learned to separate their inner peace from external circumstances, so they live their entire lives as emotional pinballs, bouncing from one reaction to the next. But why are so many people mentally fragile? The answer lies in how we've been conditioned from childhood. From the moment we're born, we're taught to seek approval, avoid discomfort, and base our self-worth on external validation. We learn that love and acceptance are conditional on our performance, behavior, and ability to please others. This creates a foundation of insecurity that follows us into adulthood. The first major source of mental fragility is approval addiction. Most people have become so dependent on external validation that they've lost touch with their own internal compass. They need constant reassurance, praise, and acceptance to feel okay about themselves. When that validation doesn't come, or when criticism arrives instead, their entire sense of self crumbles. They've outsourced their emotional stability to other people, which means they'll never have true control over how they feel. Think about how many decisions you make based on what others might think. How often do you hold back from speaking your truth because someone might disagree? How many opportunities have you passed up because you were afraid of judgment? This isn't just occasional behavior for most people. It's their default operating system. They're constantly scanning the environment for threats to their ego, ready to defend, justify, or retreat at the first sign of disapproval. The second source of fragility is the inability to handle discomfort. We live in a culture that promotes instant gratification and comfort at all costs. People have become so accustomed to avoiding anything unpleasant that they've never developed the mental muscle to handle adversity. When challenges arise, instead of seeing them as opportunities to grow stronger, they see them as problems to escape from as quickly as possible. This creates a vicious cycle. The more you avoid discomfort, the less capable you become of handling it. The less capable you are of handling discomfort, the more fragile you become. Eventually, even minor setbacks feel overwhelming because you've never trained yourself to endure anything difficult. You become like a person who's never exercised trying to run a marathon. Your mental muscles are simply too weak to carry you through. The third major factor is living in reactive mode instead of response mode. Mentally fragile people are constantly reacting to their environment rather than responding from a place of choice. They don't pause between stimulus and response. Something happens, and they immediately have an emotional reaction without any conscious control over the process. This reactive pattern becomes so automatic that they don't even realize they have a choice in how they respond. When you're living in reactive mode, you're essentially giving everyone and everything around you control over your emotional state. A rude cashier can ruin your morning. A critical email can destroy your confidence. A friend's success can trigger jealousy and self-doubt. You become a victim of your circumstances instead of the master of your internal experience. The fourth source of fragility is the stories people tell themselves about what things mean. When something happens, mentally fragile people immediately create dramatic narratives about what it says about them, their worth, or their future. A job rejection becomes proof that they're not good enough. A relationship ending becomes evidence that they're unlovable. A business failure becomes confirmation that they're destined to struggle forever. These stories aren't facts, they're interpretations. But when you're mentally fragile, you don't distinguish between what actually happened and the meaning you've assigned to what happened. You react to your interpretation as if it's reality, which amplifies your emotional response far beyond what the situation actually warrants. The final factor is the complete lack of emotional training. We're taught math, science, and history in school, but no one teaches us how to manage our minds and emotions. Most people have never learned the basic skills of emotional regulation, mental focus, or psychological resilience. They're trying to navigate life's challenges with the emotional intelligence of a child because no one ever taught them how to develop mature, sophisticated responses to adversity. This lack of training means that when pressure comes, they default to primitive emotional responses: fight, flight, or freeze. They either lash out aggressively, run away from the situation, or become paralyzed with anxiety. They don't have the tools to stay calm, think clearly, and respond strategically because they've never developed those tools. But here's the good news. Mental fragility isn't a permanent condition. It's simply the result of poor training and conditioning. Just like physical weakness can be transformed into strength through proper exercise, mental fragility can be transformed into unshakable resilience through the right practices. The question is whether you're willing to do the work to develop that strength. Chapter 2. The Science of Mental Control. Your brain is not fixed. This single fact changes everything about what's possible for your mental and emotional life. For decades, scientists believed that the adult brain was essentially unchangeable, that you were stuck with whatever neural patterns you developed in childhood. But revolutionary research in neuroplasticity has proven that your brain can be rewired, reshaped, and reprogrammed at any age. Every thought you think, every emotion you experience, and every reaction you have creates neural pathways in your brain. The more you use these pathways, the stronger they become. This is why negative thinking patterns feel so automatic. You've literally worn grooves in your brain through repetition. But it also means that you can create new pathways through conscious practice and eventually make those new patterns just as automatic as the old ones. When you understand that your brain is constantly changing based on how you use it, you realize that you have far more control over your mental and emotional experience than you ever imagined. You're not a victim of your genetics, your past, or your current programming. You're the architect of your own mind, and you can build it however you choose. The key to mental control lies in understanding how your brain processes threats and triggers emotional responses. Deep in your brain sits a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala, which acts as your internal alarm system. Its job is to scan your environment for potential dangers and trigger immediate emotional reactions to keep you safe. This system worked perfectly when humans faced physical threats like predators, but it's poorly adapted to modern psychological challenges. Today, your amygdala treats social rejection, criticism, and failure the same way it would treat a charging bear, as immediate threats to your survival. This is why a harsh email can trigger the same stress response as a physical attack. Your amygdala doesn't distinguish between actual danger and perceived threats to your ego or social status. It just sounds the alarm and floods your system with stress hormones. But here's where it gets interesting. Your amygdala can be retrained. Through consistent practice, you can teach your brain to distinguish between real threats and psychological triggers. You can develop the ability to pause between stimulus and response, creating space for conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. This is the foundation of mental control. The prefrontal cortex, located at the front of your brain, is responsible for executive functions like decision-making, impulse control, and rational thinking. When your amygdala is activated, it essentially hijacks your brain, shutting down your prefrontal cortex and putting you into pure survival mode. This is why you say things you later regret when you're angry, or why you make terrible decisions when you're stressed. Training your mind to stay unbothered is really about strengthening your prefrontal cortex and creating better communication between it and your amygdala. When you practice staying calm under pressure, you're literally building new neural circuits that allow your rational mind to override your emotional reactions. Over time, this becomes your default response rather than the exception. Meditation and mindfulness practices are particularly effective for this type of brain training because they teach you to observe your thoughts and emotions without getting caught up in them. When you meditate, you're practicing the skill of witnessing your mental activity from a detached perspective. This creates psychological distance between you and your thoughts, making it easier to choose how to respond rather than being automatically reactive. Studies have shown that regular meditation actually changes the structure of your brain. It increases gray matter in areas associated with emotional regulation and decreases activity in the amygdala. People who meditate regularly show improved ability to handle stress, better emotional control, and increased resilience to psychological challenges. They've literally rewired their brains for greater mental stability. Another crucial aspect of mental control is understanding the role of attention. Your attention is like a spotlight. Wherever you direct it becomes amplified in your experience. If you constantly focus on problems, threats, and negative possibilities, your brain will become increasingly sensitive to those things. You'll start seeing danger everywhere and living in a constant state of stress and anxiety. But if you train your attention to focus on opportunities, solutions, and positive possibilities, your brain will become more attuned to those elements of your experience. This doesn't mean ignoring real problems or living in denial. It means choosing to focus your mental energy on things that empower you, rather than things that drain you. Cognitive behavioral therapy has proven that changing your thought patterns literally rewires your brain. When you challenge negative thoughts and replace them with more balanced perspectives, you're not just changing your thinking, you're changing your neural structure. Your brain begins to default to healthier thought patterns because you've strengthened those pathways through repetition. The reticular activating system is another crucial component of mental control. This network of neurons acts as a filter, determining what information reaches your conscious awareness. It's programmed by your beliefs, expectations, and dominant thoughts. If you believe that people are generally hostile, your RAS will filter reality to show you evidence of hostility. If you believe that opportunities are everywhere, it will highlight opportunities that others miss. By consciously programming your reticular activating system through focused intention and repetitive thought patterns, you can literally change what you notice and experience in the world. This is why people who expect good things to happen often find them, while people who expect problems usually encounter them. They're not just being optimistic or pessimistic. They're programming their brains to filter reality in fundamentally different ways. The power of visualization cannot be overstated when it comes to mental reprogramming. Your brain doesn't distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and real ones. When you visualize yourself responding calmly to challenging situations, you're actually practicing that response at the neural level. You're building the mental muscle memory that will allow you to access that calm state when you need it in real life. Professional athletes have used this principle for decades. They visualize perfect performance over and over again, creating neural pathways that support optimal execution under pressure. You can use the same technique to train your mind for emotional resilience, visualizing yourself staying calm, confident, and centered in difficult situations. Chapter 3. Breaking free from emotional reactions. The moment someone criticizes you, rejects you, or treats you poorly, something automatic happens in your mind and body. Your heart rate spikes, your muscles tense, stress hormones flood your system, and a cascade of emotional reactions begins that can derail your entire day. But what if I told you that this seemingly automatic process is actually completely optional? Most people believe that emotions just happen to them, that they're passive victims of their emotional responses. They think that feeling angry when someone insults them or feeling anxious when facing uncertainty is just human nature. This belief keeps them trapped in reactive patterns that steal their peace, drain their energy, and give other people enormous power over their internal state. The truth is that there's always a gap between what happens to you and how you respond emotionally. The problem is that this gap is usually so small that you don't notice it. Stimulus and response feel simultaneous because you've never trained yourself to expand that space and create room for conscious choice. But that gap exists, and learning to widen it is the key to emotional freedom. Understanding the anatomy of an emotional reaction is the first step to gaining control over it. When something happens that your brain interprets as significant, it immediately assigns meaning to that event. This interpretation happens so fast that it feels instantaneous, but it's actually a process that you can learn to observe and influence. Let's say someone cuts you off in traffic. In the split second after it happens, your mind automatically creates a story about what this means. Maybe you think, that person is disrespectful and dangerous. Or, people don't care about anyone but themselves. Or, I can't believe how terrible drivers are these days. Based on this interpretation, your emotional system generates a response: anger, frustration, or indignation. But here's what most people don't realize. The event itself, someone changing lanes in front of you, is emotionally neutral. It's just a thing that happened. Your emotional response isn't caused by what happened. It's caused by the meaning you assigned to what happened. And since you control the meaning-making process, you ultimately control your emotional response. The first technique for emotional regulation is the pause practice. The moment you feel your emotional system activating, that first spike of anger, anxiety, hurt, or frustration, you deliberately pause. Instead of immediately reacting, you create a moment of space. In that space, you have the opportunity to choose your response rather than defaulting to your automatic pattern. This might sound simple, but it requires significant practice to implement consistently. Your emotional reactions have momentum. Once they start, they want to complete their cycle. Learning to interrupt that cycle takes conscious effort and repetition. But every time you successfully pause, you're strengthening your capacity for emotional self-regulation. During the pause, you employ what's called perspective shifting. Instead of accepting your initial interpretation of events as truth, you deliberately consider alternative explanations. Maybe the person who cut you off didn't see you, or they're dealing with an emergency, or they simply made a mistake. Maybe the colleague who gave you critical feedback is trying to help you improve rather than tear you down. Maybe the friend who didn't return your call is busy with their own challenges rather than intentionally ignoring you. This isn't about making excuses for poor behavior or being naive about people's intentions. It's about refusing to automatically assume the worst-case scenario when multiple explanations are possible. Most of your emotional suffering comes from the stories you tell yourself about what things mean, not from the actual events themselves. The emotional regulation technique called cognitive reframing takes this a step further. When something challenging happens, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" or "Why do people treat me this way?" you ask more empowering questions. What can I learn from this? How can this make me stronger? What opportunities might this create? How can I use this experience to develop greater resilience? These questions don't magically make difficult situations pleasant, but they redirect your mental energy toward growth and solution finding, rather than toward victimhood and resentment. They help you maintain your power in situations where you might otherwise feel powerless. Another powerful tool is emotional labeling. When you feel a strong emotion arising, instead of being consumed by it, you mentally step back and label it. I notice I'm feeling angry. I'm experiencing anxiety right now. This is disappointment. This simple act of labeling creates psychological distance between you and the pride emotion, making it easier to observe rather than be overwhelmed by it. The practice of emotional labeling is based on neuroscience research showing that when you name an emotion, it actually reduces its intensity. The act of putting feelings into words engages your prefrontal cortex and calms the emotional centers of your brain. You're literally thinking your way out of emotional overwhelm. Physical regulation techniques are equally important because emotions are not just mental phenomena, they're full body experiences. When you're emotionally triggered, your breathing becomes shallow, your muscles tense, and your posture changes. By consciously altering these physical responses, you can influence your emotional state from the bottom up. Controlled breathing is one of the fastest ways to shift your emotional state. When you breathe deeply and slowly, you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which triggers your body's relaxation response. This physiologically calms your emotional system and creates space for more rational thinking. The technique is simple. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, breathe out for 6 counts. Repeat until you feel your system settling. Progressive muscle relaxation works on the same principle. When you consciously relax your facial muscles, drop your shoulders, and release tension throughout your body, you're sending signals to your brain that there's no emergency. Your emotional system begins to calm down because your body language is communicating safety rather than threat. The most advanced emotional regulation technique is emotional aikido, using the energy of challenging emotions rather than fighting against them. Instead of trying to suppress anger, you channel its energy into motivation for positive change. Instead of being paralyzed by fear, you use its heightened alertness to become more focused and present. Instead of being crushed by disappointment, you allow it to clarify what truly matters to you. This approach recognizes that emotions aren't inherently negative. They're sources of information and energy that can be channeled constructively. The goal isn't to eliminate emotional responses, but to become skillful in how you work with emotional energy when it arises. Chapter 4. Building Unshakable Inner Strength. There's a specific type of person that nothing seems to shake. They receive harsh criticism without crumbling. They face major setbacks without losing their composure. They navigate uncertainty without being paralyzed by anxiety. People wonder what makes them so different, so resilient, so seemingly immune to the psychological pressures that devastate others. The answer is that they've developed what I call unshakable inner strength. Inner strength isn't something you're born with. It's something you build through deliberate practice and progressive challenge. Just like physical strength develops by repeatedly lifting weights that are slightly heavier than what's comfortable, psychological strength develops by repeatedly facing situations that are slightly more challenging than what feels easy. Most people avoid discomfort at all costs, which keeps them psychologically weak. They dodge difficult conversations, procrastinate on challenging tasks, and retreat from situations that might involve rejection or failure. While this strategy feels protective in the short term, it prevents them from developing the mental muscle they need to handle life's inevitable difficulties. Building inner strength requires a fundamental shift in how you view challenges. Instead of seeing difficult situations as things to avoid, you must begin seeing them as training opportunities. Every criticism becomes a chance to practice emotional regulation. Every rejection becomes an opportunity to strengthen your self-worth. Every failure becomes a lesson in resilience. This reframe transforms challenges from threats into tools for psychological development. The first component of unshakable inner strength is unshakable self-worth. Most people's self-esteem fluctuates based on external circumstances. They feel good about themselves when things go well, and terrible when things go poorly. This creates an emotional roller coaster that leaves them vulnerable to every setback and success. True inner strength comes from developing a stable sense of self-worth that isn't dependent on external validation, achievement, or circumstances. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or thinking you're perfect. It means recognizing that your fundamental value as a person isn't determined by your performance, other people's opinions, or temporary circumstances. Developing stable self-worth requires separating your identity from your results. You are not your job title, your bank account, your relationship status, or your latest achievement. You are not your mistakes, your failures, or your current struggles. These are all temporary circumstances that change over time. Your core worth as a human being remains constant regardless of what happens in your external world. This distinction is crucial because when your self-worth is tied to external factors, every threat to those factors becomes a threat to your identity. Criticism feels like a personal attack. Failure feels like proof of inadequacy. Success becomes an addiction because it's the only thing that makes you feel valuable. But when your self-worth is internal and stable, you can engage with challenges, feedback, and results without your identity being on the line. The second component is emotional independence. Most people are emotionally dependent on their circumstances being a certain way in order to feel okay. They need people to like them, approve of them, and validate them. They need everything to go smoothly and according to plan. They need external conditions to align with their preferences before they can feel peaceful or confident. This emotional dependence makes them extremely vulnerable because they have no control over external circumstances. Other people will sometimes disapprove. Plans will sometimes fail. Life will sometimes be messy and unpredictable. When your emotional well-being depends on things beyond your control, you live in a constant state of anxiety about what might go wrong. Emotional independence means developing the ability to feel centered and stable, regardless of external conditions. You can be disappointed when things don't go as planned without being devastated. You can prefer that people like you without needing their approval to feel okay about yourself. You can work toward goals without your happiness being dependent on achieving them. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent or detached from life. It means developing such strong internal resources that external circumstances can't throw you off balance. You care about outcomes without being controlled by them. You engage fully with life while maintaining your inner equilibrium. The third element is mental toughness, the ability to persist through difficulty without losing focus or motivation. Mental toughness isn't about being harsh with yourself or ignoring pain. It's about developing the capacity to stay committed to your values and goals, even when facing obstacles, setbacks, or discomfort. Most people quit at the first sign of significant difficulty because they've never trained themselves to push through resistance. They interpret discomfort as a signal that something is wrong, rather than as a normal part of any worthwhile endeavor. They expect progress to be linear and become discouraged when they encounter inevitable setbacks. Mental toughness involves accepting that difficulty is part of the process, not a sign that you should give up. It means continuing to take action even when you don't feel motivated. It means maintaining your standards even when it would be easier to compromise. It means treating obstacles as puzzles to solve rather than walls that stop you. The fourth component is strategic thinking under pressure. When most people face challenging situations, their thinking becomes narrow and reactive. They lose perspective, make emotional decisions, and often say or do things that make the situation worse. Inner strength includes the ability to maintain clear thinking, even under stress. This involves developing the skill of stepping back mentally and viewing situations from multiple perspectives. Instead of being caught up in the immediate emotional reaction, you can ask strategic questions. What are my options here? What outcome do I want to create? How can I respond in a way that aligns with my values and long-term goals? What can I learn from this situation? Strategic thinking under pressure also means maintaining a longer-term perspective when facing short-term challenges. Most problems that feel overwhelming in the moment are relatively minor when viewed from the perspective of months or years. Developing the habit of zooming out helps you respond proportionally to challenges rather than being overwhelmed by them. The fifth element is the ability to self-soothe and self-regulate. Instead of needing other people to calm you down, cheer you up, or help you feel better when you're struggling, you develop internal resources for managing your emotional state. You know how to center yourself when you're anxious, motivate yourself when you're discouraged, and comfort yourself when you're hurt. This self-reliance isn't about never seeking support from others. Healthy relationships are important, but it means not being dependent on others for your basic emotional regulation. You can handle your own internal storms without needing constant external reassurance or intervention. Building these components of inner strength requires consistent practice and progressive challenge. You can't develop resilience by reading about it or thinking about it. You develop it by repeatedly practicing resilient responses in increasingly difficult situations. Each time you choose courage over comfort, growth over safety, and response over reaction, you build the inner strength that will serve you for the rest of your life. Chapter 5. The Art of Strategic Detachment. One of the most powerful skills you can develop is knowing what deserves your emotional investment and what doesn't. Most people give away their mental energy to every person, situation, and opinion that crosses their path. They react to social media posts from acquaintances, stress about the opinions of people they barely know, and lose sleep over circumstances completely outside their control. This scattered approach to emotional investment leaves them drained, reactive, and constantly pulled in different directions. They never develop the focused inner strength that comes from channeling their energy strategically. They're like a garden hose with multiple leaks. There's plenty of water pressure, but it's being wasted instead of being directed where it's needed most. Strategic detachment is the practice of consciously choosing where to place your attention, emotional investment, and mental energy. It's about becoming selective with your responses rather than being reactive to everything that happens around you. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means becoming strategic about what you allow to affect your internal state. The first principle of strategic detachment is recognizing the difference between caring about something and being controlled by it. You can care deeply about an outcome while maintaining emotional equilibrium if that outcome doesn't materialize. You can have strong preferences without being devastated when reality doesn't match your preferences. You can work passionately toward goals without your self-worth being dependent on achieving them. This distinction is crucial because most people confuse caring with attachment. They think that if they don't stress about something, worry about it, and let it affect their mood, then they don't really care. But the opposite is true. When you're emotionally attached to outcomes, your thinking becomes clouded by anxiety and desperation. You make worse decisions because you're too invested in the result to think clearly about the process. Strategic detachment allows you to care more effectively because your emotions aren't interfering with your judgment. You can assess situations objectively, make rational decisions, and take appropriate action without being paralyzed by the fear of negative outcomes or distracted by the anticipation of positive ones. The second principle is understanding the concept of controllable versus uncontrollable factors. Your emotional energy should be invested primarily in things within your control: your thoughts, decisions, actions, and responses. Investing emotional energy in things beyond your control, other people's choices, external circumstances, or past events, is a waste of your mental resources that leaves you feeling powerless and frustrated. This doesn't mean being indifferent to things outside your control. You can have preferences about outcomes while focusing your energy on the actions that might influence those outcomes. You can care about other people's choices while recognizing that ultimately those choices belong to them. You can be disappointed by circumstances while maintaining your power by focusing on how you'll respond. The practice of strategic detachment involves regularly asking yourself, is this within my control? When you find yourself stressing about something beyond your influence, you redirect your attention to the aspects of the situation that you can actually affect. This simple practice prevents you from wasting energy on mental activities that don't serve you. The third principle is emotional proportionality, matching the intensity of your response to the actual significance of the situation. Most people have poor emotional proportionality. They react to minor inconveniences as if they're major crises, get devastated by temporary setbacks as if they're permanent failures, and treat casual criticism as if it's character assassination. Developing good emotional proportionality requires regularly asking yourself, how much does this actually matter? Will this situation be significant in a week, a month, or a year? Am I reacting to what's actually happening or to the story I'm telling myself about what's happening? Is my emotional response helping me handle this situation effectively or making it worse? This practice helps you save your emotional energy for things that truly matter while preventing minor issues from derailing your peace of mind. You develop the ability to handle small problems with small responses and reserve your intense emotional investment for situations that genuinely warrant it. The fourth principle involves managing your attention and information diet. In today's hyper-connected world, you're constantly bombarded with information designed to trigger emotional reactions. News outlets profit from your outrage and anxiety. Social media algorithms feed you content that generates strong emotional responses. People around you may unconsciously try to pull you into their drama and stress. Strategic detachment means being intentional about what information you allow into your mind and how much attention you give to various sources of input. You recognize that your attention is your most valuable resource, and you guard it carefully. You choose to focus on information that helps you grow, solve problems, or create positive outcomes, rather than consuming content that just makes you feel angry, anxious, or superior. This might mean limiting news consumption, being selective about social media engagement, or setting boundaries with people who consistently create drama in their interactions with you. It's about creating an information environment that supports your mental well-being rather than undermines it. The fifth principle is outcome independence, the ability to take action toward desired results without being psychologically dependent on achieving those specific results. This is perhaps the most advanced aspect of strategic detachment because it requires holding the paradox of caring deeply while simultaneously being willing to let go. Outcome independence doesn't mean being indifferent to results. It means being so centered in your own worth and capabilities that you can pursue goals with full commitment while maintaining your equilibrium regardless of what happens. You do your best work because you're passionate about the process and committed to excellence, not because you're desperate to avoid failure or prove your worth. This mindset actually improves your performance because you're not handicapped by the fear of failure or the pressure to succeed. You can take appropriate risks, learn from setbacks, and adapt your approach without being paralyzed by the need for specific outcomes. Paradoxically, outcome independence often leads to better results because you're able to think clearly and act decisively without emotional interference. Chapter 6. Mastering your internal dialogue. Right now, there's a voice in your head that's been talking to you your entire life. It comments on everything that happens, judges every situation, and influences every emotion you feel. Most people are completely unconscious of this internal dialogue, which means they're being controlled by thoughts they don't even realize they're thinking. But the quality of your internal dialogue determines the quality of your life, and learning to master it is one of the most powerful skills you can develop. Your internal dialogue isn't just random chatter. It's the programming that runs your emotional and behavioral responses. If your internal voice is constantly critical, pessimistic, or fearful, you'll live in a state of stress, insecurity, and reactivity. If your internal voice is calm, rational, and empowering, you'll naturally feel more centered, confident, and resilient. The problem is that most people's internal dialogue was programmed during childhood by parents, teachers, and cultural influences who had their own psychological limitations. You absorbed their fears, criticisms, and limiting beliefs. And now that programming runs automatically in your mind. You might hear your mother's worried voice telling you to be careful, your father's critical voice pointing out your mistakes, or your teacher's doubting voice questioning your capabilities. This borrowed programming doesn't serve you as an adult. It was designed to keep a child safe and compliant, not to help a mature person navigate complex challenges with confidence and clarity. But because it feels so familiar, you mistake it for your own voice and allow it to guide your decisions and emotional responses. The first step in mastering your internal dialogue is becoming conscious of it. Most people go through their entire day without paying attention to the stream of thoughts running through their minds. They react to situations without realizing that their reactions are being triggered by the commentary their internal voice is providing about those situations. Start paying attention to what your mind says about different circumstances. When you face a challenge, what does your internal voice tell you? When someone criticizes you, how does your mind interpret that criticism? When you're uncertain about a decision, what kind of guidance does your internal dialogue provide? Simply becoming aware of these patterns is the beginning of gaining control over them. You'll likely notice that your internal dialogue has several distinct patterns. There might be a worried voice that constantly anticipates problems and dangers. There might be a critical voice that judges your performance and points out your flaws. There might be a victim voice that tells you how unfair things are and how powerless you are to change them. These aren't your true voice. They're psychological patterns you've inherited and reinforced over time. The next step is learning to question and challenge these automatic thought patterns. Just because a thought appears in your mind doesn't mean it's true, helpful, or worth listening to. You can evaluate your thoughts the same way you'd evaluate advice from another person. Is this thought accurate? Is it helpful? Does it empower me or drain me? Does it move me toward my goals or away from them? When you catch your internal dialogue being negative, catastrophic, or disempowering, you can consciously interrupt it and choose a different perspective. Instead of automatically accepting the thought, "I'm going to fail," you can ask, "What evidence do I actually have for this? What would be a more balanced way of looking at this situation? How would I advise a friend who was thinking this way?" This process of challenging negative internal dialogue isn't about positive thinking or self-deception. It's about developing the critical thinking skills to evaluate your thoughts objectively, rather than being unconsciously controlled by them. Many of your automatic thoughts are based on incomplete information, past conditioning, or emotional states, rather than current reality. The most powerful technique for transforming internal dialogue is conscious reprogramming. Instead of waiting for negative thoughts to arise and then challenging them, you proactively program your mind with empowering perspectives and beliefs. You deliberately choose the internal dialogue you want to have and practice it until it becomes automatic. This involves developing what I call strategic self-talk, internal dialogue that supports your goals, values, and well-being, rather than undermining them. Instead of letting your mind default to worry, criticism, or doubt, you train it to default to curiosity, solution focus, and self-encouragement. You become the conscious author of your own mental programming. Effective strategic self-talk has several characteristics. It's present-focused, rather than dwelling on past mistakes or future worries. It's solution-oriented, rather than problem-focused. It's empowering rather than victimizing. It's realistic rather than either overly positive or unnecessarily negative. It supports action rather than paralysis. For example, instead of thinking, "I always mess things up," you might think, "I'm learning and improving with each experience." Instead of, "Everyone is judging me," you might think, "Most people are focused on their own lives, not evaluating mine." Instead of, "I can't handle this," you might think, "I've handled difficult things before, and I can figure this out too." The key is consistency and repetition. Your brain learns through repetition, so the thoughts you think most often become your dominant mental patterns. If you want to change your default internal dialogue, you need to consciously practice new thought patterns until they become as automatic as the old ones. Chapter 7. The Power of Mental Conditioning. Every morning when you wake up, you have a choice. You can let your mind operate on autopilot, running the same mental patterns it ran yesterday. Or you can take conscious control and deliberately condition your mind for optimal performance. Most people choose autopilot, which is why they experience the same emotional struggles, reactive patterns, and mental limitations day after day, year after year. Mental conditioning is the practice of deliberately training your mind the same way an athlete trains their body. Just as physical conditioning builds strength, endurance, and coordination through repetitive exercises, mental conditioning builds emotional resilience, psychological strength, and mental clarity through consistent practices designed to optimize your internal state. The difference between people who seem naturally calm and resilient and those who struggle with emotional reactivity isn't genetic or accidental. It's the result of different mental conditioning. Some people have accidentally developed good mental habits through their life experiences, while others have developed patterns that work against them. But once you understand the principles of mental conditioning, you can deliberately create the psychological strength and stability you want. Mental conditioning works because your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on how you use it. Every thought pattern you practice becomes stronger. Every emotional response you repeat becomes more automatic. Every way of interpreting situations becomes more deeply ingrained. This means that with conscious effort, you can literally reprogram your mind for greater resilience, clarity, and emotional control. The foundation of mental conditioning is developing non-negotiable daily practices that train specific psychological skills. Just as a physical workout targets different muscle groups, mental conditioning practices target different aspects of psychological fitness. Emotional regulation, attention control, stress resilience, confidence building, and mental clarity. The first essential practice is morning mental preparation. The first 30 minutes after you wake up are crucial for setting your mental and emotional tone for the entire day. Instead of immediately checking your phone, watching the news, or jumping into reactive mode, you use this time to consciously prepare your mind for optimal performance. This preparation involves several components. First, you set clear intentions for who you want to be that day. Not just what you want to accomplish, but how you want to show up emotionally and psychologically. Do you want to be calm and centered, focused and productive, patient and understanding? You consciously choose your emotional and mental state rather than leaving it to chance. Next, you practice visualization, mentally rehearsing how you want to respond to potential challenges that might arise during the day. If you have a difficult meeting, you visualize yourself staying calm and communicating clearly. If you anticipate stressful situations, you mentally practice your stress management techniques. This preparation programs your mind to access resourceful states when you need them. You also engage in gratitude practice, deliberately focusing on what's working well in your life, rather than defaulting to problems and concerns. This isn't superficial positive thinking, it's training your attention to notice opportunities, resources, and positive elements that your mind might otherwise overlook when under stress. The second essential practice is stress inoculation training. Just as vaccines expose your immune system to small doses of pathogens to build resistance, stress inoculation exposes your mind to manageable challenges to build psychological resistance. You deliberately put yourself in situations that are slightly uncomfortable or challenging. Then, practice staying calm and centered. This might involve cold showers to practice discomfort tolerance, public speaking to practice confidence under pressure, or difficult conversations to practice emotional regulation during conflict. The key is gradual progression. You start with challenges that are manageable but not overwhelming, then gradually increase the difficulty as your mental strength develops. Each time you successfully maintain your composure in a challenging situation, you build evidence that you can handle difficulty. This evidence becomes the foundation of unshakable confidence and resilience. Instead of avoiding challenges, you seek them out as opportunities to strengthen your mental conditioning. The third practice is evening mental review and integration. Before going to sleep, you review the day's experiences and extract lessons that strengthen your mental conditioning. You identify moments when you responded well and reinforce those patterns. You also identify moments when you could have responded better and mentally rehearse improved responses for similar future situations. This practice prevents you from simply repeating the same mental patterns day after day. Instead, you're constantly learning and evolving, turning every experience into an opportunity for psychological growth and development. Your mental conditioning becomes stronger and more sophisticated over time. The fourth component is mindfulness training, developing the ability to observe your thoughts and emotions without being controlled by them. Regular mindfulness practice creates psychological space between you and your mental activity, making it easier to choose your responses rather than being automatically reactive. This doesn't require hours of meditation. Even 5 to 10 minutes daily of focused attention training can significantly improve your mental conditioning. The key is consistency rather than duration. You're training your mind to stay present and centered rather than getting lost in mental chatter or emotional reactivity. The final element is mental flexibility training, practicing different ways of interpreting and responding to situations. Rigid mental patterns make you fragile because you can only operate effectively under specific conditions. Mental flexibility makes you resilient because you can adapt to whatever circumstances arise. This involves regularly challenging your assumptions, considering alternative perspectives, and practicing different emotional responses to the same situations. Instead of having only one way of thinking about problems, you develop multiple approaches. Instead of having only one emotional response to criticism, you practice several different ways of receiving feedback constructively. Chapter 8. Developing emotional armor. In medieval times, knights wore physical armor to protect themselves from swords and arrows. In the modern world, you need emotional armor to protect yourself from psychological attacks, criticism, rejection, manipulation, and negative energy from other people. Without this protection, you remain vulnerable to every harsh word, disapproving look, or hostile interaction that comes your way. Emotional armor isn't about becoming cold or disconnected. It's about developing such strong internal boundaries and psychological resilience that external negativity can't penetrate your peace of mind. You remain open to genuine feedback and meaningful connections while being immune to the psychological toxicity that some people spread wherever they go. The first layer of emotional armor is understanding that other people's behavior toward you is primarily about them, not about you. When someone is critical, hostile, or dismissive, they're expressing their own internal state, their own insecurities, and their own psychological patterns. Their behavior is a reflection of their mental and emotional conditioning, not an accurate assessment of your worth or character. This understanding immediately reduces the personal impact of negative interactions. Instead of thinking, "What's wrong with me that this person is treating me this way?" you think, "This person is clearly struggling with something internal that's causing them to act out." This shift in perspective prevents their negativity from becoming your emotional reality. Most people take others' behavior personally because they assume it's about them. But if you observe carefully, you'll notice that people who are consistently negative, critical, or difficult behave that way with everyone, not just with you. Their patterns are about their own psychological state, not about the specific people they encounter. The second layer of emotional armor is developing what I call outcome detachment in social interactions. Most people become emotionally invested in how others respond to them. They need approval, agreement, and positive reactions to feel okay about themselves. This need makes them vulnerable to manipulation and gives other people enormous power over their emotional state. Outcome detachment means engaging authentically in social interactions without being emotionally dependent on specific responses. You can express your truth without needing others to agree with it. You can offer kindness without requiring it to be reciprocated. You can be yourself without needing external validation to confirm that yourself is acceptable. This detachment actually makes you more effective in social situations because you're not distorted by the fear of negative reactions or the desperate need for positive ones. You can communicate more clearly, set boundaries more effectively, and respond more authentically because your emotional well-being isn't hanging in the balance of every interaction. The third layer is mastering the art of psychological boundaries. Many people struggle with emotional armor because they have weak or unclear boundaries. They absorb other people's emotions, take on other people's problems, and allow other people's moods to determine their own emotional state. This lack of boundaries leaves them defenseless against psychological intrusion. Strong psychological boundaries mean being clear about what's yours and what's someone else's. Their emotions are theirs to manage. Their problems are theirs to solve. Their opinions are theirs to hold. You can care about people without taking responsibility for their internal experience. You can be supportive without becoming emotionally enmeshed. Setting boundaries isn't about being cold or uncaring. It's about maintaining your psychological integrity so you can be helpful from a place of strength rather than being drained from a place of weakness. When you have clear boundaries, you can choose how much of your emotional energy to invest in different people and situations rather than having it pulled from you unconsciously. The fourth layer involves developing immunity to common psychological manipulation tactics. Many people use guilt, anger, emotional drama, or victim stories to control others' behavior and extract emotional energy. When you understand these patterns, you become immune to them because you recognize what's happening and don't get pulled into the emotional drama. For example, when someone uses guilt to try to control your decisions, you can acknowledge their feelings without taking responsibility for them. I understand you're disappointed, but I need to make the decision that's right for me. When someone uses anger to try to intimidate you, you can remain calm and refuse to engage with the emotional manipulation. I'm happy to discuss this when we can have a calm conversation. This immunity comes from recognizing that you're not responsible for managing other people's emotions or protecting them from the consequences of their choices. You can be compassionate without being controllable. You can be understanding without being manipulatable. The fifth layer is what I call energy management. Being conscious of how different people and situations affect your psychological energy and making strategic choices about where to invest your mental and emotional resources. Some people are energy givers who leave you feeling more positive and motivated after interacting with them. Others are energy drains who consistently pull you into negativity, drama, or emotional chaos. Developing emotional armor means being selective about your energy investments. You limit your exposure to consistently negative people. You avoid getting drawn into unnecessary conflicts. You choose environments and relationships that support your psychological well-being rather than undermine it. This doesn't mean avoiding all difficult people or challenging situations. It means being strategic about when and how you engage with difficulty. You might choose to have a challenging conversation when you're in a strong psychological state, but avoid it when you're already stressed or depleted. The final layer of emotional armor is developing what I call psychological self-sufficiency. Instead of depending on external validation, approval, or emotional support to feel okay, you develop the internal resources to maintain your emotional equilibrium, regardless of external circumstances. This means knowing how to calm yourself when you're anxious, motivate yourself when you're discouraged, and comfort yourself when you're hurt. You have internal strategies for managing difficult emotions, processing challenging experiences, and maintaining your psychological well-being without requiring constant external input. Psychological self-sufficiency doesn't mean isolation or never seeking support. It means having such strong internal resources that you can choose when and how to connect with others from a position of strength rather than need. You engage in relationships and seek support because you want to, not because you have to in order to feel okay. Chapter 9. Strategic response versus reactive patterns. Every day, you face situations that trigger automatic responses in your mind and body. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and you feel anger rising. A colleague makes a critical comment, and you feel defensive. You receive an unexpected bill, and anxiety floods your system. These automatic responses feel natural and inevitable, but they're actually learned patterns that you can unlearn and replace with more strategic alternatives. The difference between people who seem naturally resilient and those who struggle with emotional reactivity isn't that resilient people don't have triggers, it's that they've developed the ability to respond strategically rather than react automatically. They've created space between stimulus and response, and they use that space to choose actions that align with their goals and values rather than their immediate emotional impulses. Understanding the difference between strategic response and reactive patterns is crucial for developing mental control. Reactive patterns are automatic, unconscious, and driven by emotion. They're based on past conditioning rather than current reality. They often make situations worse rather than better. They're focused on immediate emotional relief rather than long-term outcomes. Strategic responses are conscious, deliberate, and driven by rational thinking. They're based on current reality and future goals rather than past conditioning. They're designed to improve situations rather than simply express emotions. They're focused on creating positive outcomes rather than just relieving immediate emotional pressure. Most people live primarily in reactive mode because they've never learned how to access strategic response mode when under pressure. Their emotional system hijacks their thinking before their rational mind can engage. They say things they later regret, make decisions based on temporary emotions, and create problems that could have been avoided with a more thoughtful response. The first step in developing strategic response capacity is learning to recognize your personal trigger patterns. Everyone has specific situations, words, or behaviors that reliably trigger automatic emotional reactions. These triggers are usually related to past experiences, insecurities, or deeply held beliefs about yourself or the world. Common trigger categories include threats to competence, being criticized or corrected, threats to autonomy, being controlled or micromanaged, threats to connection, being ignored or rejected, and threats to fairness, being treated unjustly or disrespectfully. When these triggers are activated, your emotional system immediately prepares for fight, flight, or freeze responses. Once you identify your triggers, you can prepare strategic responses in advance. Instead of waiting until you're emotionally activated to figure out how to handle difficult situations, you can plan your responses when you're calm and thinking clearly. This preparation creates neural pathways that make strategic responses more accessible even under pressure. For example, if you know that criticism triggers defensiveness, you can prepare responses like, "Help me understand your perspective," or "What specifically would you recommend?" These prepared responses redirect the interaction toward problem-solving rather than conflict and give you time to process the feedback without immediately defending yourself. The second component is developing what I call the strategic pause. This is a brief moment between trigger and response, where you consciously interrupt your automatic pattern and choose your action. The pause can be as short as a single breath or as long as asking for time to consider your response. During the strategic pause, you ask yourself several key questions. What outcome do I want to create here? How can I respond in a way that aligns with my values? What would my best self do in this situation? What response would I be proud of tomorrow? These questions activate your rational mind and help you choose responses based on your goals rather than your emotions. The strategic pause isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending you don't feel triggered. It's about creating space for your thinking mind to engage before your emotional mind takes control. You acknowledge what you're feeling while choosing how to express or channel those feelings constructively. The third element is response flexibility. Having multiple options for how to handle challenging situations rather than being locked into automatic patterns. Rigid response patterns make you predictable and limit your effectiveness. Response flexibility makes you adaptable and increases your power to influence outcomes. This means developing several different ways to handle common challenging situations. Instead of having only one response to criticism, you develop multiple approaches depending on the context, the person, and your goals. Instead of always avoiding conflict or always confronting it directly, you develop a range of conflict management strategies. Response flexibility also involves matching your response intensity to the actual significance of the situation. Minor issues deserve minor responses. Major issues deserve major responses. Most people have poor emotional proportionality. They either under-respond to serious issues or over-respond to minor ones. Strategic thinking helps you calibrate your responses appropriately. The fourth component is outcome orientation, making decisions based on the results you want to create rather than the emotions you want to express. Reactive responses are primarily about emotional expression and relief. Strategic responses are primarily about outcome creation and influence. This shift in focus dramatically changes how you approach difficult situations. Instead of asking, "How do I feel about this?" you ask, "What do I want to accomplish here?" Instead of focusing on expressing frustration, you focus on solving problems. Instead of proving you're right, you focus on moving situations in positive directions. Outcome orientation doesn't mean ignoring your emotions or always prioritizing other people's comfort over your own needs. It means being strategic about when and how you express emotions to maximize your effectiveness. Sometimes expressing anger is strategically appropriate. Sometimes expressing vulnerability creates better connections. The key is choosing your expression consciously rather than being driven by automatic impulses. The fifth element is developing what I call strategic empathy, the ability to understand other people's perspectives and motivations, not just for emotional connection, but for strategic advantage. When you understand why people behave the way they do, you can respond more effectively to their underlying needs and concerns rather than just their surface behavior. Strategic empathy helps you see past people's defensive or aggressive behaviors to the insecurities, fears, or needs that are driving those behaviors. This understanding allows you to address root causes rather than just symptoms, leading to more effective and lasting resolutions. For example, if someone is being overly controlling, strategic empathy might help you recognize that they're feeling anxious about outcomes and need reassurance about your competence or commitment. Instead of fighting their controlling behavior directly, you can address their underlying anxiety, which often reduces their need to control. The final component is continuous learning and adaptation. Strategic response isn't a fixed skill. It's an ongoing practice of learning from your experiences and refining your approaches. After challenging interactions, you review what worked, what didn't work, and what you could do differently in similar future situations. This learning orientation prevents you from getting stuck in patterns that used to work but are no longer effective. It helps you develop increasingly sophisticated responses to complex situations. Most importantly, it ensures that your strategic response capacity continues growing throughout your life, rather than remaining static. Chapter 10. Building Unbreakable Mental Discipline. Mental discipline is the bridge between intention and action, between knowing what you should do and actually doing it consistently. It's the psychological muscle that allows you to stay committed to your values and goals, even when emotions, impulses, or external pressures are pulling you in different directions. Without mental discipline, all the insights and strategies in the world remain ineffective because you lack the internal strength to implement them when it matters most. Most people dramatically underestimate the importance of mental discipline because they confuse it with willpower. They think discipline is about forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do through sheer determination. But willpower is a limited resource that gets depleted throughout the day. True mental discipline is about creating internal systems and conditioning that make the right choices feel natural and automatic rather than forced. The foundation of unbreakable mental discipline is understanding that discipline isn't just about individual decisions. It's about identity and conditioning. People who appear highly disciplined aren't constantly fighting internal battles to make the right choices. They've conditioned themselves to see certain behaviors as non-negotiable parts of who they are. Their discipline feels effortless because it's aligned with their identity rather than in conflict with it. This means that building mental discipline starts with clarifying your identity and values rather than just setting goals or making rules. Instead of saying, "I should exercise more," you declare, "I am someone who prioritizes physical health." Instead of, "I should be more patient," you affirm, "I am someone who responds thoughtfully rather than reactively." When behaviors align with identity, they feel natural rather than forced. The first component of mental discipline is developing what I call decision pre-commitment. Instead of making important choices in the moment when you're under pressure or emotional stress, you make them in advance when you're thinking clearly. You decide how you'll respond to common challenging situations before those situations arise, creating psychological momentum that carries you through difficult moments. This might involve deciding in advance that you'll always pause before responding to criticism, that you'll never make important decisions when you're angry, or that you'll maintain certain standards regardless of external circumstances. These pre-commitments eliminate the need for willpower in the moment, because the decision has already been made. Pre-commitment works because it leverages your rational mind when it's strongest to guide your behavior, when your rational mind is weakest. When you're stressed, tired, or emotional, your decision-making capacity is compromised. But if you've already decided how to handle these situations, you can follow your pre-established protocols without having to think through the decision from scratch. The second component is building discipline through progressive challenge. Just like physical strength develops through gradually increasing resistance, mental discipline develops through gradually increasing psychological challenge. You start with small commitments that you can easily maintain. Then, slowly expand your capacity by taking on more demanding challenges. This might mean starting with a 5-minute daily meditation practice rather than attempting hour-long sessions, or committing to one difficult conversation per week rather than trying to transform all your relationships at once. The key is consistent success with manageable challenges rather than sporadic success with overwhelming ones. Each small success builds psychological evidence that you can rely on yourself to follow through on commitments. This evidence becomes the foundation of unshakable self-trust, which is essential for mental discipline. When you trust yourself to do what you say you'll do, making commitments becomes empowering rather than anxiety-provoking. The third element is what I call environmental design for discipline. Your external environment has enormous influence over your internal state and behavior patterns. Most people try to build discipline through internal willpower while remaining in environments that work against their goals. This is like trying to eat healthy while keeping junk food in easy reach. Your environment undermines your intentions. Environmental design involves structuring your physical and social environment to support disciplined choices rather than undermine them. This might mean removing temptations, creating visual reminders of your commitments, or surrounding yourself with people who model the behaviors you want to develop. For example, if you want to develop the discipline of staying calm under pressure, you might remove yourself from unnecessary sources of stress, create visual reminders of your stress management techniques, and spend time with people who model emotional regulation rather than reactivity. The fourth component is developing tolerance for discomfort and uncertainty. Most failures of mental discipline happen not because people don't know what to do, but because doing the right thing feels uncomfortable in the moment. Discipline often requires choosing temporary discomfort for long-term benefit, and most people aren't trained to tolerate discomfort effectively. Building comfort with discomfort involves gradually exposing yourself to manageable levels of physical, emotional, and psychological discomfort, while maintaining your composure. This might involve cold showers, challenging workouts, difficult conversations, or other activities that train your nervous system to remain calm under stress. The more comfortable you become with discomfort, the more options you have in difficult situations. Instead of being driven to escape discomfort as quickly as possible, you can evaluate your options rationally and choose responses that align with your long-term goals rather than your immediate comfort. The fifth element is creating accountability systems that support your discipline rather than undermine it. Many people create accountability systems that rely on external pressure, shame, or punishment when they fail to follow through on commitments. These systems often backfire because they create resistance and resentment rather than genuine motivation. Effective accountability systems focus on progress rather than perfection, learning rather than judgment, and support rather than pressure. They help you stay connected to your deeper motivations for disciplined behavior rather than just creating external consequences for undisciplined behavior. This might involve regular check-ins with a mentor or coach who helps you learn from setbacks rather than judges you for them. Tracking systems that help you see progress over time rather than just current performance, or community connections with people who share your values and support your growth. The final component of unbreakable mental discipline is what I call identity-based reinforcement. Every time you act in alignment with your values and commitments, you reinforce your identity as someone who follows through. Every time you act against your values and commitments, you weaken that identity and make future discipline more difficult. This means viewing every choice as an opportunity to strengthen or weaken your disciplined identity. Small choices matter as much as big ones because they all contribute to the overall pattern of who you're becoming. Choosing to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively in a minor situation strengthens the same psychological muscle you'll need for major challenges. Identity-based reinforcement transforms discipline from something you have to do into something you get to do. Instead of seeing disciplined choices as restrictions on your freedom, you see them as expressions of your freedom to become who you want to be. This shift makes discipline sustainable because it's powered by inspiration rather than obligation. Chapter 11. Advanced Stress Immunity Techniques. There's a level of psychological resilience that goes beyond basic stress management. It's what I call stress immunity. While most people try to avoid stress or cope with it after it arrives, stress-immune individuals have trained their minds to remain completely unaffected by external pressure. They don't just manage stress, they become immune to it at the neurological level. Stress immunity isn't about becoming emotionally numb or disconnected from reality. It's about developing such sophisticated psychological skills that your nervous system remains calm and regulated even in situations that would overwhelm most people. You maintain clarity of thinking, emotional stability, and decision-making capacity, regardless of external chaos or pressure. The foundation of stress immunity is understanding that stress isn't caused by external situations. It's caused by your interpretation of external situations. Two people can face identical circumstances and have completely different stress responses based on how they interpret what's happening. This means that by controlling your interpretation process, you can control your stress response. Most people interpret challenging situations through the lens of threat assessment. They immediately scan for what could go wrong, what they might lose, or how they might be harmed. This threat-focused interpretation automatically activates their stress response even when no actual danger exists. Their mind treats a difficult conversation the same way it would treat a physical attack. Stress-immune individuals have trained themselves to interpret challenging situations through the lens of opportunity assessment. Instead of automatically scanning for threats, they scan for possibilities, learning opportunities, and ways to grow stronger. This interpretation activates their growth response instead of their stress response, keeping them calm and resourceful under pressure. The first advanced technique is called stress recontextualization. Instead of viewing stressful situations as problems to be solved or threats to be avoided, you recontextualize them as training opportunities designed to make you stronger. Every difficult situation becomes a chance to practice your psychological skills and increase your resilience capacity. This recontextualization works because it changes your relationship to difficulty from victimhood to empowerment. Instead of thinking, "Why is this happening to me?" you think, "How is this making me stronger?" Instead of, "I can't handle this," you think, "This is perfect training for developing greater capacity." The situation hasn't changed, but your psychological response to it has completely shifted. When you consistently recontextualize stress as training, your nervous system stops treating stressful situations as emergencies. Your brain learns that these situations are opportunities for growth rather than threats to survival. Over time, your stress response diminishes because your mind no longer interprets challenges as dangerous. The second technique is developing what I call preemptive calm. Instead of waiting for stressful situations to arise and then trying to manage your response, you proactively enter a state of deep calm before engaging with potentially challenging circumstances. You preload your nervous system with the neurological state you want to maintain. This involves specific breathing patterns, body positioning, and mental preparation that activate your parasympathetic nervous system before you need it. You might spend 5 minutes in controlled breathing before a difficult meeting, or use progressive muscle relaxation before a challenging conversation. You're programming your nervous system for calm before stress has a chance to activate. Preemptive calm works because it's much easier to maintain a calm state than to create one after you're already stressed. Once your stress response is activated, it takes significant time and energy to return to baseline. But if you start from a place of deep calm, you have much more resilience capacity to handle whatever challenges arise. The third advanced technique is called stress compartmentalization. Instead of allowing stress in one area of your life to contaminate all other areas, you develop the ability to contain stress responses to specific contexts while maintaining calm in others. You can be dealing with a work crisis without bringing that stress energy into your personal relationships, or handling a family challenge without letting it affect your professional performance. Stress compartmentalization requires developing clear psychological boundaries between different areas of your life. You create mental and emotional separations that prevent stress from one context from bleeding into others. This might involve specific transition rituals between work and home, or mental exercises that help you shift psychological states when moving between different life domains. This technique prevents stress amplification, where challenges in multiple areas compound each other and create overwhelming psychological pressure. Instead, you handle each challenge as a discrete situation without allowing them to merge into one massive source of stress. The fourth technique is developing stress utilization, the ability to channel stress energy constructively rather than being overwhelmed by it. Stress creates heightened alertness, increased energy, and enhanced focus. These can be valuable resources if you know how to direct them effectively, rather than being controlled by them. Stress utilization involves recognizing stress energy as fuel that can be channeled toward productive action rather than as a problem to be eliminated. You learn to use the heightened awareness that comes with stress to notice details you might otherwise miss. You use the increased energy to accomplish more than you normally could. You use the enhanced focus to tackle challenging tasks with greater intensity. This approach transforms stress from an enemy into an ally. Instead of trying to eliminate stress completely, you develop the skill of directing stress energy toward your goals. The same physiological arousal that could create anxiety becomes the foundation for peak performance. The fifth advanced technique is what I call metacognitive stress monitoring. This involves developing the ability to observe your stress response from a detached perspective rather than being consumed by it. You become aware of your stress patterns, triggers, and responses without being identified with them. Metacognitive monitoring creates psychological distance between you and your stress experience. Instead of thinking, "I am stressed," you think, "I notice that stress is arising." This subtle shift in language reflects a fundamental shift in perspective that reduces the emotional impact of stress while maintaining your ability to respond appropriately to challenging situations. This detached awareness allows you to make strategic choices about how to respond to stress rather than being automatically reactive. You might choose to use breathing techniques, recontextualize the situation, or take a strategic break. The key is that you're choosing your response from a place of awareness rather than being driven by unconscious stress patterns. The final advanced technique is developing what I call stress prophecy, the ability to predict and prepare for your personal stress patterns before they arise. You become so familiar with your psychological patterns that you can anticipate when stress is likely to occur and preemptively implement countermeasures. This involves tracking your stress patterns over time to identify predictable triggers, timing, and escalation sequences. You might notice that you always feel stressed on Sunday evenings because you're anticipating the work week, or that you become reactive during certain times of the month, or that specific types of conversations reliably trigger your stress response. Once you identify these patterns, you can develop specific protocols for managing them before they become overwhelming. You might implement Sunday evening relaxation rituals, adjust your schedule during predictably stressful periods, or prepare specific responses for triggering conversations. Stress prophecy transforms you from a victim of your stress patterns into a strategic manager of your psychological state. Instead of being surprised and overwhelmed by stress, you anticipate it and meet it with prepared responses that maintain your equilibrium. Chapter 12. The Psychology of Unshakable Confidence. True confidence isn't about feeling superior to others or never experiencing doubt. It's about developing such deep trust in your ability to handle whatever life presents that external circumstances lose their power to shake your internal stability. This kind of confidence isn't dependent on always succeeding, always being right, or always being approved of by others. It's rooted in something much deeper and more reliable. Most people's confidence is conditional. It depends on things going well, people responding positively, and external validation confirming their worth. This type of confidence is fragile because it's dependent on factors outside their control. When circumstances change, criticism arrives, or failures occur, their confidence collapses because it was built on unstable foundations. Unshakable confidence is built on a completely different foundation. It's based on your ability to handle difficulty, learn from failure, and maintain your values regardless of external circumstances. This confidence actually grows stronger through challenges because each difficulty you navigate successfully provides evidence of your resilience and capability. The first component of unshakable confidence is developing what I call process confidence versus outcome confidence. Outcome confidence depends on achieving specific results, getting the job, winning the competition, or receiving approval. Process confidence depends on your ability to give your best effort, learn from experiences, and maintain your integrity, regardless of outcomes. When your confidence is tied to outcomes, you become anxious about results and handicapped by the fear of failure. You avoid risks, play it safe, and often perform below your capacity because you're more focused on protecting your confidence than expressing your abilities. This protective stance actually undermines the very outcomes you're trying to secure. Process confidence frees you to perform at your best because you're not handicapped by attachment to specific results. You can take appropriate risks, learn from failures, and adapt your approach based on feedback without your fundamental confidence being threatened. Paradoxically, this often leads to better outcomes because you're operating from a position of strength rather than fear. The second component is developing competence-based confidence through systematic skill development. While confidence isn't entirely dependent on competence, having genuine skills and capabilities provides a solid foundation for self-trust. When you know you're competent, you naturally feel more confident because your confidence is backed by reality. This doesn't mean becoming perfect or never making mistakes. It means developing enough skill in important areas of your life that you trust your ability to handle challenges effectively. You might not know exactly how you'll solve a particular problem, but you trust your problem-solving abilities. You might not know exactly what to say in a difficult conversation, but you trust your communication skills. Building competence-based confidence requires honest assessment of your current capabilities and systematic effort to develop skills in areas that matter to you. This might involve professional training, personal development, or simply practicing important skills until you feel genuinely capable rather than just hoping for the best. The third component is what I call failure integration. The ability to learn from failures and setbacks without allowing them to undermine your confidence. Most people's confidence is fragile because they see failure as evidence of inadequacy rather than as information for improvement. Failure integration involves developing a sophisticated relationship with failure that allows you to extract value from difficult experiences without being crushed by them. You learn to separate your identity from your results, to see failures as data rather than judgments, and to use setbacks as fuel for growth rather than reasons for giving up. This doesn't mean being indifferent to failure or not caring about results. It means developing the psychological resilience to bounce back quickly from failures and the wisdom to use those experiences to become more capable. Each failure you integrate successfully makes you more confident because you prove to yourself that you can handle difficulty and emerge stronger. The fourth component is developing what I call identity-based confidence. This is confidence that comes from a clear sense of who you are, what you value, and what you stand for, independent of external circumstances or other people's opinions. When you have strong identity-based confidence, you don't need constant external validation because your sense of worth comes from internal alignment with your values. Identity-based confidence requires deep self-knowledge and the courage to be authentic even when it's challenging. You need to know what matters to you, what you believe in, and what kind of person you want to be. This internal clarity becomes the foundation for unshakable confidence because it gives you a stable reference point that doesn't change based on external circumstances. When your confidence is rooted in your identity and values, criticism doesn't crush you because you know who you are beyond other people's opinions. Failure doesn't devastate you because your worth isn't determined by your performance. Success doesn't go to your head because You recognize it as external validation of internal qualities rather than the source of your confidence. The fifth component is developing what I call social confidence, the ability to remain centered and authentic in social situations, regardless of other people's responses. Social confidence isn't about being the most charismatic or popular person in the room. It's about being comfortable with yourself and expressing that authentically without needing specific reactions from others. Most people struggle with social confidence because they're constantly monitoring other people's responses and adjusting their behavior to maximize approval. This creates anxiety because they're trying to control something that's ultimately outside their control: how others think and feel about them. Social confidence comes from focusing on your own authenticity and contribution rather than on other people's approval. You speak your truth because it's your truth, not because you think others will agree with it. You offer kindness because you value kindness, not because you expect it to be reciprocated. You maintain your standards because they're important to you, not because others will respect you for it. The sixth component is developing resilience-based confidence. Confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever challenges life presents. This isn't confidence that bad things won't happen. It's confidence that you have the internal resources to navigate whatever does happen with grace and strength. Resilience-based confidence is built through successfully navigating increasingly difficult challenges over time. Each time you face a difficult situation and handle it effectively, you build evidence of your capacity to deal with adversity. This evidence becomes the foundation for deep, unshakable confidence because it's based on proven ability rather than untested hope. This type of confidence actually seeks out appropriate challenges because they provide opportunities to build greater resilience. Instead of avoiding difficulty, you embrace it as training for becoming even more capable. You understand that confidence built through avoiding challenges is fragile, while confidence built through overcoming challenges is unshakable. The final component is what I call contribution-based confidence. This is confidence that comes from knowing you have something valuable to offer the world, regardless of how that contribution is received or recognized. When you're focused on contributing your best rather than on receiving recognition, your confidence becomes independent of external feedback. Contribution-based confidence shifts your focus from getting to giving, from taking to offering, from needing to serving. This shift is psychologically liberating because it removes the desperate quality that undermines authentic confidence. When you're genuinely focused on contribution, you naturally become more confident because you're aligned with something larger than your own ego needs. This doesn't mean becoming selfless or ignoring your own needs. It means recognizing that true confidence comes from knowing you have something valuable to offer, rather than from constantly trying to prove your worth or extract validation from others. When you're genuinely contributing, confidence becomes a natural byproduct, rather than something you have to manufacture or maintain. Chapter 13. Mastering your mental environment. Your mental environment is just as important as your physical environment, but most people pay far more attention to organizing their external space than organizing their internal space. They'll spend hours cleaning and decorating their home while allowing their mind to be cluttered with negative thoughts, toxic influences, and mental pollution that undermines their psychological well-being. Just as a cluttered, dirty physical environment affects your mood and productivity, a cluttered, toxic mental environment affects your emotional state, decision-making capacity, and overall life satisfaction. But unlike your physical environment, your mental environment is completely within your control once you understand how to manage it effectively. Your mental environment consists of several key components: the information you consume, the thoughts you entertain, the internal dialogue you maintain, the people you associate with, and the mental habits you practice daily. Each of these components either supports your mental strength and emotional stability or undermines it. There's no neutral ground. Everything in your mental environment is either helping you or hurting you. The first component to master is your information diet. In today's hyper-connected world, you're constantly bombarded with information designed to capture your attention and trigger emotional responses. News outlets profit from your anxiety and outrage. Social media algorithms feed you content that generates strong reactions. Marketing messages try to make you feel inadequate, so you'll buy products to fix imaginary problems. Most people consume information passively, allowing their mental environment to be shaped by whatever content happens to cross their path. They check their phone first thing in the morning, scroll through social media throughout the day, and fall asleep to television or online videos. This passive consumption fills their mind with other people's agenda, opinions, and emotional energy rather than supporting their own goals and well-being. Creating a healthy information diet requires becoming intentional about what content you allow into your mind. This means choosing information sources that educate, inspire, and empower you, rather than those that simply entertain or agitate you. It means limiting exposure to negative news cycles that create anxiety about events you can't control. It means being selective about social media consumption and unfollowing accounts that consistently make you feel worse about yourself or the world. The goal isn't to become ignorant about what's happening in the world, but to consume information strategically rather than compulsively. You might choose to check news updates once daily rather than throughout the day. You might select a few high-quality information sources rather than consuming random content. You might set specific times for social media use rather than scrolling whenever you're bored. The second component is managing your thought patterns and mental habits. Your mind has default patterns of thinking that operate automatically unless you consciously direct them. These patterns were formed over years of repetition and reinforcement, but they can be changed through conscious effort and consistent practice. Most people's default thought patterns include worry about future events they can't control, rumination about past mistakes or regrets, comparison with other people's apparent success, and self-criticism about their perceived inadequacies. These patterns consume enormous mental energy while producing no positive outcomes. They're like running mental software programs that drain your psychological resources without providing any useful results. Mastering your thought patterns requires first becoming aware of them, then consciously choosing more productive alternatives. Instead of worrying about future possibilities, you can plan for what's within your control and accept what isn't. Instead of ruminating about past mistakes, you can extract lessons and focus on current opportunities. Instead of comparing yourself to others, you can focus on your own growth and progress. This mental pattern replacement requires consistent practice because your brain will naturally default to familiar patterns unless you consciously direct it otherwise. But over time, new patterns become just as automatic as the old ones, except they support your mental strength rather than undermining it. The third component involves curating your social environment and relationships. The people you spend time with have enormous influence over your mental state, thought patterns, and emotional responses. Some people consistently elevate your thinking and inspire you to be your best self. Others drain your energy and pull you into negativity drama, or limiting beliefs. This doesn't mean only associating with positive people who never face challenges or express negative emotions. It means being strategic about who you allow to influence your mental environment on a regular basis. You want to spend time with people who model the psychological qualities you want to develop: resilience, optimism, growth mindset, emotional regulation, and constructive problem solving. You also want to limit your exposure to people who consistently model the psychological patterns you want to avoid: chronic complaining, victim mentality, emotional reactivity, negative rumination, and toxic drama. This might require setting boundaries with family members, changing social circles, or limiting certain types of social interactions. The fourth component is creating positive mental inputs that actively strengthen your psychological resources. Instead of just eliminating negative influences, you proactively feed your mind with content that builds mental strength, emotional resilience, and positive thinking patterns. This might involve reading books that expand your perspective and teach valuable skills, listening to podcasts or audiobooks during commute time, practicing gratitude exercises that train your attention to notice positive aspects of your experience, or engaging in learning activities that challenge your mind and build confidence through competence development. The key is making these positive inputs consistent and systematic rather than sporadic. Just as physical fitness requires regular exercise rather than occasional workouts, mental fitness requires regular positive inputs rather than occasional inspiration. The fifth component involves creating mental rituals and practices that reinforce the psychological states you want to maintain. These are specific activities you do regularly to strengthen particular mental qualities like calm, focus, confidence, or resilience. Mental rituals might include morning meditation to start each day centered, evening reflection to process the day's experiences constructively, weekly planning sessions to maintain focus on your priorities, or specific breathing exercises to use during stressful situations. The specific practices matter less than the consistency and intentionality behind them. These rituals serve as psychological anchors that help you maintain your desired mental state, regardless of external circumstances. They provide structure and stability that supports your mental environment even when outside influences are chaotic or negative. The final component is developing mental boundaries that protect your psychological space from unwanted intrusion. Just as you lock your door to prevent unwanted visitors from entering your home, you need psychological boundaries to prevent unwanted thoughts, emotions, or influences from contaminating your mental environment. Mental boundaries might include refusing to engage with certain topics that consistently drain your energy, setting limits on how much emotional labor you're willing to provide to others, or creating specific times and spaces for mental quietude that are protected from external demands. These boundaries aren't about being selfish or uncaring. They're about maintaining the psychological strength and clarity that allow you to be genuinely helpful and present when it matters most. When your mental environment is clean, organized, and well-maintained, you have far more capacity to contribute positively to others while maintaining your own well-being. Chapter 14. Advanced Emotional Regulation under Extreme Pressure. There's a significant difference between managing emotions during everyday challenges and maintaining emotional control under extreme pressure. When the stakes are high, time is limited, and multiple stresses are compounding, your basic emotional regulation techniques may not be sufficient. You need advanced skills specifically designed to function under the most demanding psychological conditions. Extreme pressure situations have several characteristics that make them particularly challenging for emotional regulation. First, they often involve high stakes, where the consequences of poor decisions are significant. Second, they typically include time pressure that limits your ability to use extended calming techniques. Third, they frequently involve multiple simultaneous stressors that can overwhelm your normal coping capacity. Under these conditions, your nervous system goes into heightened alert mode, flooding your body with stress hormones that can cloud your thinking, intensify your emotions, and trigger fight-or-flight responses that interfere with optimal performance. Most people's emotional regulation skills deteriorate rapidly under extreme pressure because they've never trained specifically for these conditions. Advanced emotional regulation requires developing skills that work specifically when your normal techniques are insufficient. These are emergency psychological protocols that can be implemented quickly and effectively even when your system is highly activated and your thinking is compromised by stress. The first advanced technique is called physiological override. When extreme pressure activates your stress response, your body undergoes specific changes that fuel emotional reactivity. Shallow breathing, muscle tension, increased heart rate, and heightened cortisol levels. Physiological override involves rapidly shifting these bodily states to support calm thinking rather than reactive emotions. The most powerful physiological override technique is tactical breathing. This isn't the gentle, slow breathing you might use during meditation. It's a specific breathing pattern designed to rapidly shift your nervous system from stress response to calm response even under extreme conditions. Tactical breathing involves breathing in for 4 counts through your nose, holding for 4 counts, breathing out for 6 counts through your mouth, and holding empty for 2 counts. You repeat this cycle 3 to 5 times with full attention on the counting and physical sensations. This pattern activates your parasympathetic nervous system and begins calming your stress response within 60 seconds. The second advanced technique is called emotional compartmentalization under pressure. When facing extreme challenges, you may experience intense emotions that are completely natural and appropriate to the situation. Fear, anger, sadness, or anxiety. The goal isn't to eliminate these emotions, but to prevent them from interfering with your decision-making and performance. Emotional compartmentalization involves acknowledging your emotional response while creating psychological separation between feeling emotions and being controlled by them. You might think, I notice I'm feeling intense fear right now, and that's completely understandable given this situation. I can feel this fear and also think clearly about my options. This technique works because it validates your emotional experience while maintaining your executive function. You're not fighting against natural emotional responses, which would waste energy and create internal conflict. Instead, you're creating space to feel emotions, while also accessing your rational mind for decision-making. The third technique is called priority-based focus under pressure. When multiple stressors are competing for your attention, your mind can become scattered and overwhelmed, making it difficult to think clearly or regulate emotions effectively. Priority-based focus involves rapidly identifying the most critical element of a complex situation and directing all your mental resources toward that priority while temporarily setting aside less urgent concerns. This requires asking yourself, what is the one thing that matters most right now? and then deliberately focusing your attention on that single element while allowing everything else to fade into the background. You're not ignoring other concerns permanently, but you're creating temporary mental clarity by reducing cognitive load. Priority-based focus prevents the emotional overwhelm that comes from trying to handle everything at once. It also ensures that your limited mental resources under pressure are directed toward the most important decisions rather than being scattered across multiple concerns. The fourth advanced technique is called strategic emotional utilization. Instead of trying to eliminate intense emotions under pressure, you learn to channel their energy productively. Fear can provide heightened alertness and attention to detail. Anger can provide energy and determination. Even sadness can provide clarity about what truly matters to you. Strategic emotional utilization involves asking, how can I use the energy of this emotion to help me handle this situation effectively? Instead of, how can I get rid of this emotion? You're transforming emotional energy from a hindrance into a resource. For example, if you're facing a critical deadline and feeling intense anxiety, instead of trying to calm the anxiety, you might channel its energy into focused, productive action. The heightened alertness that comes with anxiety can actually improve your performance if you direct it constructively rather than allowing it to spiral into paralysis. The fifth technique is called rapid cognitive reframing under pressure. When extreme pressure hits, your mind immediately begins interpreting the situation, and these interpretations directly influence your emotional response. Under pressure, most people default to threat-based interpretations that amplify stress and emotional reactivity. Rapid cognitive reframing involves quickly shifting from threat-based to opportunity-based interpretations even under extreme conditions. Instead of thinking, "This is a disaster," you think, "This is a test of my capabilities." Instead of, "I can't handle this," you think, "This is exactly the kind of challenge that will make me stronger." This reframing must be done quickly and decisively, because prolonged analysis under pressure often leads to overthinking and increased anxiety. You choose an empowering interpretation and commit to it, rather than continuing to analyze the situation from multiple angles. The sixth advanced technique is called performance state anchoring. This involves developing the ability to rapidly access optimal psychological states, even under extreme pressure, through specific physical cues or mental triggers that you've trained in advance. Performance state anchoring requires practicing optimal emotional regulation during calm periods, while associating that state with specific physical actions like touching your thumb to your index finger, taking a specific posture, or saying a particular phrase to yourself. Through repetition, these physical cues become triggers that can rapidly access calm, focused states, even under pressure. When extreme pressure hits, you can activate your performance state anchor and immediately access the psychological resources you need, rather than having to build that state from scratch while under stress. This technique is particularly valuable because it works even when your thinking is compromised by pressure. The final advanced technique is called post-pressure integration. After navigating extreme pressure situations, it's crucial to process the experience in a way that strengthens your capacity for future challenges, rather than just relieving the immediate stress. Post-pressure integration involves reviewing what worked, what didn't work, and what you learned about your own psychological patterns under extreme conditions. You identify which techniques were most effective, which emotions provided useful energy, and which interpretations supported optimal performance. This integration process ensures that each extreme pressure situation becomes training that increases your capacity for future challenges rather than just an ordeal to survive. Over time, you develop increasing confidence in your ability to handle whatever pressure life presents, because you've systematically learned from each challenging experience. Chapter 15. The Unbothered Life, Your New Reality. After implementing everything you've learned, something remarkable happens. The things that used to disturb your peace no longer have power over you. Criticism rolls off without penetrating your core. Rejection becomes simple information rather than a judgment of your worth. Uncertainty transforms from a source of anxiety into a space of possibility. You've become genuinely unbothered by the external circumstances that control most people's emotional states. But being unbothered doesn't mean being indifferent. You haven't become cold, disconnected, or uncaring. Instead, you've developed such strong internal resources that you can engage fully with life while maintaining your psychological equilibrium. You care deeply about what matters to you while remaining unattached to specific outcomes. You feel emotions fully while choosing how to express and channel them constructively. This is the paradox of the unbothered life. The more psychologically independent you become, the more genuinely connected you can be with others. When you're not constantly protecting your ego, managing your insecurities, or seeking validation, you have enormous capacity for authentic relationships, meaningful contribution, and purposeful action. Your energy is no longer consumed by emotional management, so it becomes available for creation, growth, and genuine impact. The unbothered life operates from a completely different psychological foundation than most people experience. Instead of your well-being depending on external circumstances, it comes from internal resources that you've developed through consistent practice. Instead of your confidence fluctuating based on other people's responses, it remains stable because it's rooted in your own competence and character. Instead of your peace being threatened by every challenge, it deepens through each difficulty you navigate skillfully. Living this way requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to difficulty and challenge. Most people see problems as interruptions to their happiness and obstacles to their goals. You begin to see challenges as opportunities to practice your psychological skills and demonstrate your mental strength. Every difficult situation becomes a chance to apply what you've learned and prove to yourself that you can handle whatever life presents. This shift transforms your relationship to uncertainty and change. Instead of needing to control external circumstances to feel secure, you develop confidence in your ability to adapt to whatever circumstances arise. You become like water, flowing around obstacles, adapting to any container, but maintaining your essential nature regardless of external conditions. The unbothered life also involves a sophisticated relationship with emotions. You understand that emotions are information and energy, not commands that must be obeyed, or problems that must be solved. When anger arises, you can use its energy for positive change without being controlled by its impulses. When fear appears, you can extract its warnings without being paralyzed by its intensity. When sadness comes, you can honor what matters to you without being overwhelmed by grief. This emotional sophistication allows you to be fully human while remaining psychologically free. You don't suppress emotions or pretend they don't affect you. Instead, you develop such skill in working with emotional energy that emotions become tools for deeper engagement with life, rather than barriers to effectiveness. Your relationships transform when you become genuinely unbothered. You can love people without needing them to validate you. You can support others without taking responsibility for their emotions. You can set boundaries without guilt and maintain your standards without apology. You can be vulnerable without being desperate and strong without being rigid. Other people are drawn to this quality because it's so rare in a world where most people are emotionally reactive and psychologically dependent. Your calm presence becomes a refuge for others, and your authentic strength inspires them to develop their own psychological resources rather than depending on external sources of stability. Your decision-making capacity also reaches a new level when you're truly unbothered. Without the noise of emotional reactivity, people-pleasing, and outcome attachment, you can see situations clearly and choose responses that align with your values and long-term goals. You're no longer distorted by fear, desperation, or the need for immediate emotional relief. This clarity extends to every area of your life. You can evaluate opportunities objectively rather than being swayed by external pressure or emotional manipulation. You can handle criticism constructively rather than being defensive or devastated. You can navigate conflict skillfully rather than avoiding it or escalating it. The unbothered life doesn't mean that difficult things stop happening to you. Life continues to present challenges, setbacks, and uncertainty. People may still criticize you, reject you, or treat you poorly. External circumstances will still be unpredictable and sometimes difficult. The difference is that these external realities no longer determine your internal experience. You've developed such strong psychological resources that you can handle whatever comes while maintaining your peace, clarity, and sense of purpose. Challenges become interesting puzzles to solve rather than threats to survive. Setbacks become opportunities for resilience building rather than evidence of inadequacy. Uncertainty becomes space for growth and possibility rather than cause for anxiety. This inner strength radiates outward and affects everything you touch. Your work improves because you're operating from calm focus rather than stressed reactivity. Your relationships deepen because you're genuinely present rather than preoccupied with managing your own emotional state. Your contribution to the world increases because your energy is available for creation rather than consumed by psychological maintenance. Most importantly, you become an example of what's possible for human psychological development. In a world where emotional reactivity and psychological fragility are considered normal, your unbothered presence demonstrates that there's another way to live. You show others that it's possible to be strong without being rigid, caring without being dependent, and engaged without being controlled. This is your invitation to step fully into this new way of being. You have all the tools and knowledge necessary to train your mind to stay unbothered no matter what life presents. The only question remaining is whether you'll commit to the consistent practice required to make these psychological skills automatic parts of your daily experience. The choice is yours, but understand that this choice will determine the quality of every day you have remaining in your life. You can continue living at the mercy of external circumstances and other people's behavior, or you can take full responsibility for your internal experience and develop the unshakable psychological strength that makes you truly free. The unbothered life is waiting for you. It's time to claim it.